When we think about wars that changed the course of history, our minds usually jump to epic, sprawling conflicts: World War I, World War II, the Napoleonic Wars. We picture massive armies, global alliances, and battles involving millions of soldiers, but history is full of surprises. And it hides a fascinating truth. Some of the smallest wars have had the biggest consequences. These conflicts were often short, limited in scale, and frequently overlooked in our school textbooks. Yet, they managed to reshape borders, bring down empires, and completely alter the future for entire nations. They prove that you don't need a world war to change the world. Today, we're diving into the untold history of these small conflicts that punched way above their weight, exploring the strange, the brief, and the downright bizarre wars that changed the world forever. Our first story takes us to medieval Italy in the year 1325. Imagine going to war over something you could buy at a hardware store. That's exactly what happened between the rival city-states of Bologna and Modena. The cause: a single wooden bucket. It all started when a group of soldiers from Modena snuck into Bologna and, as a prank, stole an oaken bucket from a public well. Bologna was furious and demanded its return. Modena refused. What should have been a forgotten joke spiraled into a full-blown military conflict. This wasn't a small skirmish. We're talking about over 30,000 soldiers clashing in the Battle of The fighting was fierce, with thousands of casualties. In the end, Modena emerged victorious and, to add insult to injury, they kept the bucket as a war trophy. This strange conflict, known as the War of the Bucket, perfectly illustrates the fragile political tensions of medieval Europe. It shows how simmering rivalries and a heavy dose of pride could escalate even the most trivial dispute into bloodshed. And believe it or not, that very bucket still exists today. It's displayed in a museum in Modena, a centuries-old symbol of human foolishness and the absurd reasons we go to war. Next, we travel to the mid-19th century, where two of the world's great powers nearly went to war over a piece of bacon. In 1859, the United States and the British Empire found themselves in a tense standoff on a small patch of land called San Juan Island, located between modern-day Washington State and Vancouver Island. Both nations claimed sovereignty over the island. Tensions were already high, but they exploded when an American farmer named Lyman Cutler found a large black pig, owned by a British man, rooting through his potato patch. This wasn't the first time. Fed up, Cutler shot and killed the pig. When British authorities threatened to arrest him, American settlers called for military protection. Before long, what started as a dispute over a pig had escalated into a full-blown military crisis. The U.S. sent over 60 soldiers, and the British responded with 3 warships. For the next few months, hundreds of soldiers faced each other with loaded weapons, ready for a conflict that could have engulfed North America. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. No shots were ever fired beyond the first one that killed the pig. After 12 long years of joint military occupation, international arbitration peacefully resolved the border dispute in favor of the United States. The pig war serves as a stark reminder of how easily even the most trivial events can push powerful nations to the brink of war. Now for a conflict that holds a world record: the shortest war in recorded history. Welcome to the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896. At the time, the Sultanate of Zanzibar was a protectorate under the British Empire. When the pro-British Sultan died, his cousin, Khalid bin Bargash, seized power in a coup without British approval. This was a direct challenge to Britain's authority in the region. The British were not amused. They issued an ultimatum. Khalid had until 9 a.m. on August 27th to lower his flag and leave the palace. Khalid, believing the British were bluffing, fortified his palace with thousands of soldiers and even an armed royal yacht. As the deadline passed, the British warships in the harbor opened fire. The bombardment was overwhelming. The palace was turned to rubble, Zanzibar's small navy was sunk, and its defenses were obliterated. The war was over in a flash. Depending on the source, it lasted between 38 and 45 minutes. Khalid fled, and the British installed their preferred ruler. Despite its ridiculously short duration, this war had a massive impact. It cemented British dominance in East Africa and sent a clear message to anyone who dared to challenge the empire's power. It was a swift, brutal, and incredibly effective display of colonial might. Just a few decades later, In 1969, a different kind of cultural event sparked a war. Football. The conflict between El Salvador and Honduras is popularly known as the Football War, or the 100-Hour War. The two nations were set to play 3 qualifying matches for the 1970 FIFA World Cup, but the games took place against a backdrop of deep-seated political and social tensions, mainly concerning immigration and land reform. Honduran land laws had led to the persecution and displacement of thousands of Salvadoran immigrants. When the football matches began, the atmosphere was electric with nationalistic fervor. The first game, in Honduras, was followed by riots. The second game, in El Salvador, was even more violent. The media in both countries fanned the flames, and by the third and final match, diplomatic ties had been severed. On July 14, 1969, the Salvadoran military launched an invasion of Honduras. The war itself lasted only 4 days, but it was devastating. Thousands of people were killed or wounded, and over 100,000 Salvadorans were forced to flee Honduras. The conflict shattered the Central American common market and left a legacy of bitterness that damaged relations for decades. The football war is a tragic example of how a beloved sport, intended to bring people together, can become the trigger for real-world violence when underlying tensions are already at their breaking point. Our final story is perhaps the most bizarre war ever declared. In 1932, the Australian government officially went to war against birds, specifically emus. After World War I, many Australian veterans were given land to farm in Western Australia, but they soon faced an unexpected and relentless enemy, an army of over 20,000 emus. These large, flightless birds were migrating inland and discovered that the newly cultivated farmland was a paradise. They devoured and destroyed crops on a massive scale, threatening the livelihoods of the struggling farmers. Desperate, the farmers appealed to the government for help. The Minister of Defense agreed and dispatched a small military contingent, armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The soldiers thought it would be an easy task. They were wrong. The emus proved to be brilliant guerrilla tacticians. They were fast. They would split into small groups when fired upon, and they were surprisingly resilient to bullets. After several weeks of failed operations and wasted ammunition, the military was forced to withdraw in humiliation. The media had a field day, mocking the failed campaign. The Great Emu War, as it came to be known, was a victory for the birds. While it's a humorous footnote in history, it serves as a powerful and ironic lesson about the limits of military power against the forces of nature. From a stolen bucket to a trespassing pig, from a 38-minute bombardment to a war sparked by a football game and even a military defeat at the hands of giant birds. These conflicts may seem small, strange, or even comical on the surface, but their impact was enormous. They reshaped borders, redefined international diplomacy, and exposed the raw, often irrational, nature of human pride, fear, and misunderstanding. They teach us that history isn't only written by great empires and their massive armies. Sometimes, the most profound changes and the most important lessons come from the smallest of wars, the forgotten skirmishes that left the deepest marks on our world. History is always more complex and far more interesting than we think. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the odd corners of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more untold stories. See you next time.